Hey guys, so I came across an article today by Reuters. Typically they're okay, I find, but they're better than CNN, but they're still fairly leftist. And there was one article today that was blaming Trump for the recent immigration crisis in Canada and all the refugees crossing into here over the past couple years, since his presidency. But the title is Collateral Damage: How Trump Threw Canada's Refugee System into Turmoil. But the author is Anna Melher Paperny, and she actually responded to me on Twitter when I pointed out a few things within the article that she happened to leave out. And then she brought up, she's like, oh, actually, we covered this a couple of years ago, or we covered this when it happened. But I'm like, but you didn't put it in the article, so it kind of like, you're lying by omission in a sense by not adding in the fact that when Trump made his changes to the immigration policy in America, Trudeau came out the very next day, timed his response to say like, "Hey, we'll take you in, we'll take in all the refugees. Don't worry, we won't turn anybody away." Right? So that had a huge impact on it. But she conveniently left that out, and she conveniently left out the safe third country agreement, or what is it? Safe third country agreement. And yeah, this is agreement between America and Canada. Refugee claimants who cross at unofficial crossings, such as farmers' fields near the border town of Emerson, Manitoba, so that's in my province, or Lacolle, Quebec, in Quebec, cannot be turned back as they are not subject to the agreement. Instead, they are arrested for illegal entry and then turned over to Canadian Border Services. If they are not found to be a threat to Canada, most of them will then begin the process of applying to refugee status. So they have a way to get into Canada illegally and will just allow them in anyways. And I pointed that out. I'm like, this is a blatant loophole. And the girl, she responded, she's like, oh, it's a mischaracterization to call it a loophole. I'm like, no, it isn't. It is a blatant fucking loophole. They can go in through there and not through any other places. But, I'll continue to read a little bit more of the article. She's like, buffered by three oceans, United States to the south, Canada has for decades had a luxury of being able to pick and choose its newcomers. So few asylum seekers crossed the U.S. border illegally over the years that Canada didn't consistently track the numbers. Yeah, but that was under a conservative, Harper, and Trudeau has just been in the government the past 2 years. They're not the ones actually tracking the numbers. But that has changed drastically over the past 14 months. U.S. President Donald Trump's crackdown on illegal immigration and his move to strip, they use language like to strip Haitians and Salvadorans and other of their temporary legal status have had a broad effect on Canada's refugee system. Reuters interviews with social service providers, government officials in a review of Canadian immigration data show, right? So there are like more than 20,000 people, including thousands of Haitians, Nigerians, and hundreds of Turks, Syrians, and etc., have crossed the border into Canada illegally over the past year in search of asylum, many fleeing in fear that Trump would deport them to their home countries. So it's like it is far more than 20,000. They're not really tracking these numbers really well, but they're already, blaming Trump because they're like, oh, they question them. They're like, oh, yeah, we fear Trump's crackdown. That's why we left. But this unexpected northward migration has overwhelmed Canada's system for processing asylum claims, leading to the worst delays in years. Aid agencies are also struggling to house asylum seekers because of the shortage of accommodation in the four cities most affected by the migration wave: Toronto, Montreal, Winnipeg, and Vancouver. So yeah, that's one of the cities I live in, Winnipeg, which is mainly affected from this because Emerson is one of the areas that they can cross into illegally, but pretty much legally, with the loophole in the safe third agreement system that we have between America and Canada. But the Canadian government was forced to set aside, see, it's like the Canadian government was forced to set aside 173 million in its latest budget to pay for the extra patrols at border crossings to cope with the influx, as well as security screenings and processing of refugee applications. So she's framing it like we are forced to. It's like, no, we were not forced to. Trudeau did that on his own violation, or like, volition or whatever. Like, he can easily turn these people away if he wants. He can go change the agreement, fix the loophole, but they're not even talking about it. They don't mention it. So he, he's not forced to do anything. He wants to spend this money on these people. But but it's just the way, they're framing it. It's like, oh, we're forced to spend all this money. But Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's government has discussed the situation with the Trump administration, but has been careful not to publicly blame the U.S. president's policy for triggering the migration wave. Nevertheless, it is already making preparations for more people to cross the border once the weather warms. So, we have no intention of doing anything. It's like, they're kind of framing it like, oh, Trudeau's kind of afraid of angering the evil man Trump, who may be angry and impose tariffs on us. It's stupid. And then, we will be ready, Immigration and Refugee Minister Ahmed Hussein said in an interview. It's like, yeah, sure you will. Aid agencies who at the forefront of dealing with the influx say they are struggling and need more funding, a comprehensive long-term plan, and better coordination with Ottawa. So he's like, we will be ready, yet we're not even ready. We're not even helping the ones that are here. We're not even processing their claims quickly. So they're not ready, and they're, most of the work is being done by the provinces. But it's going to get worse. The numbers keep climbing, said Ilona Becks, vice president of the Island Refugee Society of British Columbia, which had to turn away refugees last year for the first time in 35 years because it did not have enough money to cope with the growing number of asylum seekers. So, it's like even these people who are taking refugees for years can't even handle the amount that are coming in. The influx shows no signs of abating. More than 1,500 asylum seekers walked across the border in January. Those working with refugee claims say this is no blip, it's the new normal. So, yeah, see, it's the new normal. Trudeau has no intention of doing anything about it. And they're just going to be like, well, it's Trump's fault. We'll just blame Trump. Has nothing to do with anything else. It's all Trump's fault because he's a big meanie trying to strip these people of their rights to be in America, right? And then since January 2017, Reuters has sought to obtain the numbers. So since 2017, they have sought to obtain the numbers of asylum seekers who walked across the U.S. border into Canada in years prior to Trump election. The Canadian government has said no national historical data is available. So, they don't even have the data available to show it. Trump's tougher immigration policies have had a major impact on Canada's Immigration and Refugee Board, which determines refugee claims. It has become so overwhelmed with cases, it has ignored legislated time limits for dealing with them. So, all refugees' claims are supposed to be processed within 60 days. Increasingly, the board has failed to meet those standards. In December, 86% of hearings did not happen within the prescribed time frames. So, that is just getting worse and worse. And on February 20, the board said will effectively prioritize those applicants who have been waiting months or years. This will mean a longer wait for more recent arrivals for the 20-month average estimated time processing claims. So, they're like, oh, no, these refugees are going to have to wait longer and it's going to be harder on them. Like, who the fuck cares? They should not be in Canada to begin with, because what people are forgetting to mention is that they came from America, a safe country. So they should not even be allowed to country hop like that. They're not allowed to leave the first safe country that they are in. So, that's what pisses me off the most. It's not even like they have any intention of trying to fix the problem. They're like, okay, well, how are we going to house these people? How are we going to educate these people? How are we going to put them on welfare? How can we fast track them to vote? The government is committed This is the funniest part. The government is committed to an efficient and fair asylum system, said a spokesperson for Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada, the government department responsible for the Immigration and Refugee Board. So it's just a lot of fluff. They say, oh, we're committed to doing this, we're committed to helping you, committed to making your life better, but that's not what they do. They never do that. They just say that so they can get reelected next year. Canada's refugee tribunals have historically been leery of claims made by people who come through its wealthy southern border. So, see, they even know that, like, we should not be allowing people to become citizens from the American border. It's bullshit. But of the more than 2,500 claims finalized last year, 53% were granted refuge status. So, they are going to push through the majority of these claims. And that was only, a fraction of the percentage of the ones that have been processed so far. So this another 170 million they're going to put into it. They're just going to process all these people, so then they can be on tax, be on welfare, be on this and be on the system sooner. And then, what is this? Rulings reviewed by Reuters writers indicate the tribunals are giving credence to claimants who say they fear deportation or racist attacks following Trump's election, on a platform advocating more restrictions on immigration. So, yeah, if you come in, you're like, oh, I'm afraid because of Trump's racist policies, let me in. They'll be like, oh, okay, well, so the ones who were too stupid to mention that, maybe that's why they got turned away. The slightly smarter ones were like, oh, okay, well, I'm afraid because of racism. And we're like, oh, racism? Okay, we'll take you in. Well, meanie Trump's being a racist to you. And, okay, White House did not immediately respond. So the accommodation squeeze, and this is another bullshit thing, asylum seekers are walking across the border into some of the tightest housing markets on the continent. Last summer, thousands slept in Montreal's Olympic Stadium. So, that costs a lot of money. And in Toronto, 31% of the people sleeping in city-run shelters in January were refugee claimants, up from 19% a year ago. So these shelters are for poor Canadians, not for poor refugees. We have lots of poor Canadians that need these shelters in the wintertime because it gets really fucking cold. It can get minus 40 degrees here in Winnipeg. Like, that's really fucking cold. And a lot of you guys come from warm fucking countries. You do not have to worry about that shit. Go back to your own fucking country instead of taking up shelters that our poor people need, you selfish fuckers. Honestly, that's bullshit. And then, in November, Toronto approved the booking of more hotel rooms for refugee claimants through the end of 2018 at the cost of $20 million, according to city documents. So, $20 million in November just for hotel rooms. Do we put our bums in hotel rooms? Do we put our poor... No, these people are being treated so fucking well. It's so ridiculous. And, Canadians, native Canadian-born Canadians, are just being shit on. It's like, fuck them. Fuck us. It's everybody but us. It's refugees, it's immigrants, it's women, it's whatever. But pretty much white dudes, white men and shit, nah, fuck you. Go to hell, You people are useless, essentially. And then, the city is working on a more comprehensive refugee plan, but it needs more help from federal government, said Christine Wong Tam. The status quo renting thousands of hotel beds is absolutely unsustainable. So at least she understands it's unsustainable. But she's just like, we need more money. We are not saying no to refugees. We are saying absolutely come and live in Toronto, build your life in Toronto. But we cannot do this without the support of other orders of government, she said. So, she's like, oh, I don't want to be racist. I'm not saying go away, but we need more federal fundings to, build housing for you people. And Toronto's mayor has raised the issue repeatedly with the federal government. The mayor's spokesperson, Don Pete, wrote an email. So, these liberal mayors, they don't want to fix it either. They're just like, hey, let's give them more money so we can get them to live here so they can vote me in next year. because I'm doing a lot for these people, and I'm virtue signaling. People think I'm really nice, and they'll vote me in next year. But, they don't really care. They're getting all this money through tax money, through violence, through theft, anyways. But, the federal government says it won't give cities more money for asylum seekers who are barred from assessing. The $762 million federal fund is permanent is for permanent residents or people who have already been granted refugee status. So the federal government's not giving them any money. So what they're really doing is they're just putting the burden on the province. So then they can make their budgets look good. And they can be like, oh, see, we didn't waste money here. Yeah, you just made the provinces deal with it. And you're like, just earlier in the article, the guy's like, oh, we're going to stand with these people and make sure they're okay. But clearly that's not the case, because they're just like, oh, we'll just let the federal government deal with it. So all these cities are struggling massively right now with this refugee crisis. And this whole article itself is just blaming the Trump administration when it's clearly the Trudeau administration. It is the policies we have had in place for years that we have not changed since 2004. So, enough of this bullshit fucking propaganda, leaving out Trudeau's tweet saying, refugees, please come into Canada, leaving out the fact that we have a policy that has a huge loophole to allow people into our country, and just blaming it 100% on Trump's policies. But this is just what you get from, biased liberal reporters. And, you would think that Reuters, people think that's a little bit more, in the middle. But no, they're just as bad as a lot of other people. And, that's the thing. The media, they all lie. They all have a spin. You got to be skeptical of literally everything, because they have their own agenda, and that's how they lie. They lie by omission. They start off this whole article saying all this shit, bring out all these different things, but they just leave out a lot of the very important things, right? Like the policies, the Safe Third Agreement Act between Canada and America. This is how they convince people, because most people do not know this information. So they just see, oh, Trump, big meanie, making Canada a really nice country, give a lot of their money and deal with all these refugees because we're mean and this and that. It's like, no, a lot of these refugees, first of all, should have been sent home a long time ago anyways. They were in America for years and years and years, and they just don't want to go back home. Yes, your country's still shitty, and it's, you probably don't want to go back to it, but I'm sorry, you can't just stay in other developed nations because you don't like your country. That's just not how it works. But clearly, if it's up to liberals and stuff, that is how it works. That's because you vote a certain way. If you guys all started voting conservative, you'd see their stance on immigration change drastically overnight, right? But that's probably not going to be the case anytime soon. But if you like my content, subscribe and have a good day. See ya.